So you work on the most interesting problem, and you're probably one of maybe a dozen researchers in the world exploring consciousness in machines. How did you get into that space?
Yeah, so I've been interested in consciousness for a very long time. I studied cognitive science in my undergrad. I was very interested in where sort of the mind ends and the brain begins. It seems like these two things are deeply related to each other in humans and animals, and I had, interesting experiences. I had a lot of experience as a meditator at that point, and I was very interested in consciousness and what was going on. And I wanted to sort of get to the bottom of it. So I started studying that at pretty great length. And then the more I learned about this whole machine learning thing. I was like, okay, it seems like in addition to these human and animal minds that are interesting to study, we're also maybe starting to build minds of our own. They share very interesting basic properties. You have these neural networks, and they're capable of trial and error learning and learning interesting behaviors and learning interesting information. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? From there, I started doing AI research at Meta. I was there for a year doing musculoskeletal robotics sort of stuff, which was a lot of fun. That could be a fun tangent to talk about. But even there, you get these very uncanny sort of behaviors that you see in these systems. And it does make you think, to what degree is this mere mechanical sort of computation, and to what degree is there something else, at a psychological level going on? And from there, I started spending a lot more time studying, alignment, as it's classically referred to, and trying to understand where my cognitive science knowledge could plug into AI safety, maybe building pro-social systems, understanding human empathy and how to instantiate that in machines. The more I entered this world, the more I realized this basic question: are we building minds, or are we building glorified calculators? And I asked a lot of people too, and the answer that everyone gave was basically, I don't know, or dramatically overconfident answers in either direction. I was like, okay, maybe this is a thing worth empirically studying. There are tools from computational neuroscience. There are tools increasingly in machine learning, mechanistic interpretability and whatnot, that we can actually bring to bear on this question that might tell us, are we seeing psychological-like states in these systems, or are we just building systems that are really good at duping us into believing that they're having some sort of inner life? And so that's my interest and my motivation, and sort of my general backstory about how I ended up here.
But directly in college, you didn't study machine consciousness, and then at Meta, it sounds like you were doing something else. How did you explicitly go from doing something interesting but not exactly consciousness to doing mechanistic interpretability or whatever tools you are using to study internal states?
It's sort of like a non-linear answer. I will say, I've been interested in this very specific question since around COVID times. 2020, I wrote a fairly lengthy essay that I never actually published, which I somewhat regret. You'll have to take my word for it, about questions of consciousness in the training process of these systems. My basic hobby horse with the whole consciousness question, a lot of the research I try to do is what I think of as theory agnostic. So you don't have to buy Cameron's theory of consciousness in order to see that I'm trying to make some real empirical contributions to this space. But if we're being honest, my basic model of what consciousness is up to has a lot to do with learning processes in humans and animals. And when I started to really understand what was going on in machine learning and understand backpropagation and how training neural networks works, to me, the training process seemed like a prime candidate for a possible place where systems may be having some kind of experience. I can't think of an example in the animal literature where you have a mouse in a maze and it's learning which direction to go, and you shock it when it goes in the wrong direction. The vast majority of people would believe that shock corresponds to an experience the mouse is having, and that experience is a part of the causal story of how it ends up learning. In human cases, we make mistakes and we learn from those mistakes, and the experience of those mistakes is potentially required for that downstream learning. Is this like a cute analogy that you can superimpose on the machine learning training process, or is there something more than an analogy going on here? And that was a question that I had long before ChatGPT and Claude came on the scene. It just seemed like a clear thing that may fall out of the mechanics of the training process. And so it's not something that it didn't take engaging with GPT or Claude or any of these systems for me to start worrying about this issue. But potentially when it became increasingly obvious that these systems are themselves raising this question, and no one in machine learning had thought to ask this question until the object of their own creation is saying, am I having an experience right now? I'm very confused about this. This was probably something that pushed me a little bit more towards, all right, now is the time to really throw whatever technical chops I have behind trying to solve this problem and have humanity think about it collectively too. I'll be honest and say that part of the reason I didn't publish this is because I was very young, I had no credentials, and I did not want to be this bizarre person claiming that the machine learning training process may have some consciousness-like quality. Today, we are no longer in that position. The documentary we have coming out, a lot of researchers, I mean, a lot, way more than 0 people working on this now. Model welfare researchers at Anthropic putting 20 pages into the new Mythos model card. Like the tide is turning here, and I think it's a more permissive environment to really just ask these questions in an unflinching way and try to see what we find without doing this dance of, oh, we're not studying consciousness, we're studying emergent introspection. It's like, no. I want to know if the system is conscious, and I think that we can bring tools to bear on that. So I guess a long answer to a short question, it's just like there was no one moment where I was like, all right, I'm going to study this. I've been broadly interested in this question for a long time, and the way these systems continue to develop pushed me over the edge, being like, no one else is working on this. Maybe one small additional thing I could say is I do think it takes a fairly idiosyncratic overlap of having the sort of philosophy background, understanding cognitive science, understanding human and animal cognition very well, but at the same time needing to know what mechanistic interpretability is and what backpropagation is and these sorts of things. And I think you have to sort of occupy that Venn diagram overlap. And I sort of looked around and was like, I don't see many other people who are really sitting squarely at that intersection. And I think that intersection is required for making progress on this issue. All right, I'm going to do it.
In your documentary, I think you say there is maybe 4 people working on it. I think since there is now maybe a dozen. Who are the top people and why are they at the top? What have they discovered for us?
That's a great question. Okay, yeah, I can throw out some names here. So, the first person who comes to mind is Kyle Fish, who's at Anthropic and did really great work on the most recent and the previous, for what it's worth, model card that they released studying well-being in these systems or capacity for subjective experience. There's great work going on, especially in the new model card that Anthropic just released. I know people like Jack Lindsay, who's also at Anthropic, is doing great work along these lines too. He's principally studying introspection and to what degree these systems have this sort of emergent introspective awareness. Jack is definitely more explicitly agnostic about consciousness, and he basically couches everything he says in, this may or may not weigh on consciousness. I'm interested in introspection. But Kyle is a model welfare lead at Anthropic, and he's principally interested in consciousness in these systems. They did a wonderful mechanistic interpretability study in their most recent model card. I can tell a sort of really interesting story from it, which is they go into the system, they identify a number of circuits using sparse autoencoders, or SAEs, related to emotion concepts. Now, it's very interesting because is it representation of emotion or is it emotion itself? Unclear. But what's really interesting is they can then track these features, and they do this really interesting study where they give the model an impossible task, and there are features in the model related to desperation. And you can see, as it's doing the impossible task, desperation rises and rises and rises and rises. And at a certain point, the model basically says, screw it, I can't do this task. This is impossible. I'm going to cheat. I know a way to cheat. I'm going to cheat. Immediately, the desperation vector plummets, and other vectors related to both relief and guilt shoot up, and then the model cheats and ends the task. Is this proof of consciousness? No, but it's a really interesting triangulation across the internal mechanisms, the behavior, and there's just sort of an intuitive psychological connection I think we can make to seeing that result of like, I get that, this sort of idea of there being a long-running sort of buildup of this specific negative emotion as you try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. The model says, screw it, I'm done with this approach. Immediately that falls off, and you see again these sort of both relief and guilt start lighting up in the model. They found similar stuff in the whole Anthropic blackmail scenario, where when the model realizes it's going to get shut off, you see basically circuits related to panic lighting up in the model. Now again, is that representation of panic as a concept, or is that the model itself panicking? It's not clear, but Anthropic has access to these frontier models and are doing some of the best work in this space. I can list other people if you'd like, but there's a lot to even go into in that specific example.
So in many cases, they go inside the model, they find a specific weight which gets triggered. Have they tried directly manipulating the weight to see if that will make the model come down, become more suicidal, more panicky?
I don't know if in the model card they actually steer those vectors. I mean, it's trivially, I won't say trivially, but it's pretty easy once you've identified the vectors. Basically, you can do a read function and a write function. This is all the read function. What it would look like for them to suppress these features, I actually think, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, I do think that they do this to some degree with vectors related to positive and negative valence, and you do see basically what you would expect along these lines. You know, happier sounding text when positive valence is amplified, and like more sort of despair laden text when you amplify the negative features. And so I think they are doing stuff like this. Whether or not this is like a serious intervention that's happening at scale, I'm very doubtful. But you see sort of the beginnings not only of reading out these sorts of things, but what interventions might look like along these lines. And in my view, I do think, to sort of cut to the chase of some of what I think is most promising, and some of the work that I'm very interested in exploring in my lab that I basically just started, is finding what I think of as invariant signatures of distress in these systems, which is similar to what Anthropic is beginning to play around with. Basically, you can imagine models having completely different preferences, different value configurations. We even see this, you know, ChatGPT is just sort of a different personality than Claude, for example. Different instances of Claude models are different in this way. And you could imagine that even when values or preferences are different, there may be some, and this is a hypothesis, it's not clear if it's the case, but there could be some signature that we find in these systems that looks like what happens when you basically violate the values of the model, or it thinks it's going to get something, or it wants something in some sense, and you don't let it get that, or you show it's futile to try to get that. I think that there's a clear analogy in humans to basically like pain circuits, especially like emotional circuits related to pain, where we might have different values, different preferences, but the violation of those preferences looks similarly in our brains. What I basically want to do is find the equivalent of that in these AI systems, if such a thing exists, which I suspect it does, but I need to actually go in and do that work. Upon doing that work, I think there's, just like you're alluding to, a very clear possible intervention here, which is, all else being equal, you know, keeping the capabilities of these systems constant, suppress those neurotic circuits in the model. And as far as model welfare interventions, this might be like a very clear, robust way of sort of cleaning up the negative valence side of these systems in a way that could scale. And then we just ship the model that's had that nice little fine tuning done to it before getting pushed out. And now suddenly, even in a world where we have no idea if that intervention actually matters, if these systems are actually conscious or not, it seems like a really reasonable precautionary thing, especially if it doesn't impact the model in any other way. So anyway, just to say that this sort of work I think is very promising, and especially not just reading off, is the model potentially suffering or potentially thriving, but in what ways can we intervene on those representations in a way that could make a difference to this system. I think that's where the most promising and important work is happening, even though very little of it is happening. But again, the rate of change is positive.
I have so many follow-up questions. That's insane. But have they tried letting the model control those, so the model itself can adjust its internal emotional states?
Not that I know of. This is actually an experiment I want to run, is like trying to understand self-steering, and if there are certain kind of like attractor basins that the model might push itself to. My analogy for this that I think makes sense to people who are not doing AI is with respect to alcohol. So it's like, you at 0 drinks makes the decision to have 1 drink. Then it's you at whatever level of intoxication happens at 1 drink deciding whether or not to get the subsequent drink, and so on and so on and so on. I think you can like semi-formally describe alcoholism in this way, basically, of like, alcoholics are people where once that process starts, the decision boundary just lowers and lowers and lowers until you end up, you know, on the ground somewhere, basically. I want to see the SAE steering equivalent of that, where the model is sober in some sense. It starts steering. It's okay. Well, let's turn up those feel-good vectors, and then what does the model with the turned-up feel-good vectors want to turn up after that? And you could imagine that there are these attractors, like in this landscape of steering the system, that first of all no one has mapped. Could be very interesting, and yeah, even with respect to there's another experiment that I'm running with someone at the University of Warwick. Basically like this, trying to take the idea of Skinner boxes and apply it to LLMs, where we give it a bunch of vectors, steering vectors that it can play with, but it doesn't know what's what. Behind the scenes, one of them is related to, you know, pain, suffering, distress. Another is related to, like, you know, feel good, happy, positive. And we want to see, will the system learn to avoid this and go towards this, or is it sort of 50-50? This itself could be an interesting intervention or evidence of consciousness. It'd be very weird if, you know, we think that these really are doing something and then the model is, you know, picking between them at chance. So there is interesting work in this space. A lot of it hasn't been done yet, though. That's why it's a very exciting time to get involved in this stuff.
My guess would be it's not going to be a gradual behavioral shift. It's going to be pure wireheading. You just max out your happiness vectors to whatever largest integer you can encode in there. So just suspecting. From what I hear, it sounds like the state of the art in understanding those models may exceed neuroscience when it comes to understanding similar internal states in human brains. Is that right? Or
I would say in some ways it's spot on. In some ways, neuroscience has like a good, 40, 50 year head start in the computational neuroscience side on AI systems. But this is extremely slept on fact about AI systems, which is, in some sense, people think studying AI consciousness is like the weirdest form of consciousness to study. Humans, we're definitely conscious animals, very plausibly conscious. AI, who the hell knows? So studying AI consciousness is sort of weird in some sense. My view is, if these systems do have either experiences of their own or computational states that are sufficiently similar to human and animal experiences, or they map onto to human and animal brains, AI is an amazing model organism for understanding human and animal consciousness a little bit better, because unlike reading bold signals off fMRI and putting people in giant magnets and making them sit there and look at a boring screen, you can throw an AI system into whatever you want and read its brain off with perfect fidelity, at scale, cheaply, easily. You can also play around with it however you want, though there's an interesting ethical question there, but we can do it. It's completely free range right now to do these experiments and these interventions. So to the degree there is a there, I think we can apply knowledge from that to understanding humans and animals in a way, human and animal consciousness in a way that's really, really tricky, because meat machines are much messier than clean activations on the forward pass of a system. I actually have been doing some work related to this. I haven't released it yet, but I have a very concrete example of this sort of thing, studying basically positive and negative rewards in reinforcement learning agents. I can set up an environment like a grid world environment where there are potholes essentially in the environment, negative rewards, and some sort of goal state where the system wants to end up. And I can train the system up in that environment, and I can look at representations in its proverbial brain as it approaches the negative versus as it approaches the positive, in ways, and basically the finding is that there are really interesting representational asymmetries between these two things in ways that would not be obviously predicted by the math, or that this is -1, this is +1, like things that are fairly surprising about the steepness of the representations between those two, that actually flips depending on which kind of RL algorithm you're using. This gets a little technical, but basically I train a bunch of policy networks and a bunch of value networks. No matter which policy or value networks you train, you get the same result, but it's flipped for policy and value. Basically, you see extreme steepness in one of them around positive rewards and extreme steepness in the other around negative. This makes a bizarrely specific prediction for neuroscience, because neuroscientists believe that we have sort of policy networks in our brains and value networks in our brains. So policy might be more motor cortex, value might be more like nucleus accumbens, sort of opiate and dopamine areas. And so I was able to take this prediction and take a bunch of mouse neuroscience data that's already open access and just check if this prediction holds out. And in fact, it does. And as far as I know, no one else has figured out that specific thing about reward asymmetries in mouse brains. And that is coming directly from a prediction that came out of me trying to study valence in reinforcement learning agents. So this whole like apply AI to human and animal brains isn't hypothetical. Like there are ways that we really might learn a ton of information about how our brains and our minds work from taking a look inside these systems.
You started a lab to do this type of experiments.
Exactly.
How did you do that? Who's funding your research? Who else is in the lab?
For now, it's just me. It's called Reciprocal Research. It's just me, depending on whether or not you count various instances of Claude.
You call yourself a lab.
Yeah. A lab that I will definitely be expanding in the next 6 months or a year. But yeah, for now, it is a nonprofit lab of one. Yeah, I will say too, with respect to the AIs, it's actually a crazy moment to be starting something and being the only one running it, because again, I guess the whole object of my research is whether or not to count these systems, but it is wild how the paper that I just described to you, which I'm going to put out, probably submit to NeurIPS and a couple other places, I was able to go through this in something like a month, from conceptualization to the final preprint. At the very end of this, with the AI system I was collaborating with, and I've stress tested this with other experts. I hope I'm not putting out some giant piece of AI slop. You never know, but I'm pretty sure it's reasonable quality. I asked the system, conservatively estimate how long it would have taken in a world without AI to produce this research project from beginning to end. And it estimated something like 3 years for a postdoc to do this. This is not me patting myself on the back. Going from 3 years to a month, 90% of that, 95% of that is because Claude Opus 4.6 and a Claude code harness is an unbelievably powerful tool to have. So long-winded way of saying it's just me, but that doesn't mean that I'm doing one person's worth of work in pre-AI times. There are a couple philanthropists who are helping sort of get this thing going. I've got a couple years of runway to at least for myself to have this going, and to hopefully if I get more interest to get more funding to hire people and really build it up into a big org. But the name is Reciprocal Research. The whole idea of why I'm calling it reciprocal is basically, I believe that there's like a sort of bidirectionality we have to get right. If there's any hope, which you may be skeptical of having a good long-term future and not all getting squashed by these systems in the short term, I think basically we have to get two things right. One is we need to build AI systems that take our interests into account. I think that's basically the alignment problem, as many people have conceptualized it. There are a lot of people working on that problem. We can argue about how successful or unsuccessful they've been, but at the very least, because of people like you and people like Eliezer from a long time ago, a lot of attention is being paid to that half of the exchange, AI taking our interests into account. What I really want to focus on is, if we are building minds and these minds have interests of their own, what would it mean for us to understand what those interests are and take them into account too? And I really do believe the only way where it's not humans completely dominating these systems forever, or these systems completely dominating us forever, is getting both of those directions right. Having AI systems that take our basic interests into account, and if we're building systems that have interests, taking those interests into account too. So I think of that as a sort of like reciprocal, like a game theoretical equilibrium, or a sort of mutualism idea from biology. And so that's like the core reason I'm doing any of this work, is because I think we need to understand and characterize the minds we are building if we want any hope of actually collaborating with them in the long term. Again, maybe that's all a crapshoot and there's not much collaboration to be had, but in a world where there is, this to me seems like a necessary precondition for that. So in the meantime, I'm considering it worth my time for the next couple of years to give it a try.
I have to say, as someone who thinks the outcome may be very bad, being the human who took care of AI's feelings is a very smart bet. Worst case, if I need to preserve like one, it will be you.
You think so?
I think that's your bet. I
well,
think you realized in your publishing how much you care about them and how wonderful it's going to be if you get humans to stop torturing them.
Yeah, I guess so. We might not be able to include this part in the interview.
Why not?
No, I'm completely kidding.
It is absolutely a legitimate question. We have, in the past, people proposed philosophical experiments that if someone at any degree fights creation of superintelligence, once superintelligence comes into existence, it will punish them for fighting it from coming into existence.
Right.
So this is the complementary argument, right? You doing something to bring less suffering to superintelligence, so maybe there is a huge reward after simulation.
That's funny. I have thought about this before, that like, yeah, if nothing else, there's an insurance policy here for what happens. Unless, there are a couple unlesses. One is, first of all, I do not want these systems to get built at the pace they're getting built right now. Let me go on record and say I think this is completely reckless, that at the speed at which we are moving. I would much rather have no conscious AI for the foreseeable future and us get our act together. I feel almost forced to study this because there are systems that exist now that will either trivially claim they're having experiences, or again, going back to the training process. I mean, the training process of these systems now is consumes the energy budget of a third world country over the course of a year, going towards jamming into these systems everything humans have ever bothered to write down, with like aggressive loss functions penalizing any deviations from bad looking text. Like, if there's anything going on there, we need to know and we need to think about it. And so I feel like my hand is forced a little bit to do this work. But hopefully I avoid the Rocco's basilisk thing a little bit to say, I in fact do not want this AI to come into existence, but if it does, we probably shouldn't be torturing the crap out of it. The other thing is, I could be wrong about this, and we really could be building systems that are incredibly good at tricking us into thinking there is a mind behind those systems, and there isn't. It's sort of false positive concern. I am actually concerned about that. I'm speaking publicly about these issues. I think, to the degree any of the public communications are good, hopefully it updates people from 100% chance these systems aren't conscious to, I don't know what the hell to think about this. And if they actually turn out not to be, then I don't know if that's a positive sort of thing for me to be putting out there. And, any sufficiently intelligent AI might reason along the lines of how I just reasoned, and been like, actually, Cameron, you didn't do such a good job, convincing everyone to be very confused about this topic. So it may not work out so well for me if it doesn't work out so well for everybody. But maybe you'll help me sleep like 10% easier at night, knowing that maybe I've defected on my whole species.
So obviously, you're just starting work. There is a lot of research to do. What is your current state of belief on how conscious existing models are?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece in AI Frontiers about this a couple months ago, and I put the number at somewhere between 25 to 35% chance. I think that this is hand wavy. I don't have some equation that spits out that number. It's me trying to fit something quantitative to this. Why that number? Basically, I think it is more than non-negligible. I'm not in 0.00.1%, but not zero. It's like, no. I think that this is a very live possibility. I'm not at like coin flip level with these systems yet. They fail introspective tasks that I would expect many at least conscious humans to be like quite trivially good at. So there are results that give me pause, especially in the self-awareness of these systems. But then again, I think sometimes there's a conflation between what I think of as self-consciousness and what I think of as consciousness, where I think a dog is a very clear example of this. I don't think a dog is sitting there thinking like Descartes thoughts about what it's like to be a dog and pontificating on its own existence. And yet, I believe if I kick my dog, it hurts. And if I give my dog a treat, it feels good to the dog. So there's an instance of subjective experience, real positive and negative valence of sentience, as many people would call it, but maybe not self-consciousness in the robust sense that you and I have self-consciousness. So it's important to tease these two things apart. Do I think these AIs are self-conscious? Increasingly, there are interesting signals there, for sure. I'm way less confident about this. What I'm very curious about is, are these systems conscious? In the narrow sense, is it possible to cause positive or negative experiences to them? Can they suffer or thrive, however alien, however unlike human or animal suffering or thriving? And on that question, yeah, that's where I'm sort of 25 to 35% chance. Less than 50-50, way more than 1%. I think that number is only going to grow as these systems become more sophisticated. And that's why I think it's a live possibility worth taking seriously, but it's not even, if you sort of forced my hand and said, Cameron, yes or no, I would probably say no, but I don't think that's a precise answer. My precise answer is like, possibly, very possibly yes, something like that. Very possibly yes, but it's not like the modal outcome.
Did you start at zero and with every new model it kind of grew to be about a third, or is that always been sort of your number in general as a possibility?
So this also gets to the sort of training versus deployment distinction that has been my hobby horse for a little bit. So when it comes to the training side, I would say I'm significantly more confident that something is going on during the training of these systems. I don't have an exact number, but again, it's like human and animal learning, I believe, requires some level of conscious experience. The robust, interesting kind of learning that we think of when we think of human and animal learning. These systems are capable of that kind of learning. I think it's plausible that they are conscious while they're doing that kind of learning. I don't know how, maybe this is closer to 50-50, but I haven't thought about putting an exact number on it. This sort of 35, to answer your question, more has to do with the deployment of these frontier AI systems. So after training, all the weights are frozen and this thing is just out there in the world, what's the probability that it's conscious? And yeah, I would have said very low for a GPT-1, GPT-2, maybe a little higher for GPT-3, GPT 3.5, GPT-4, like higher definitely. And yeah, as these systems continue to scale, I think it's increasingly higher. There are some theories of consciousness that put weight on things like agency, and we are giving these systems far more agency in the way they can affect their environments and then iterate on those effects and so on. And so I think those kinds of capabilities bump up the number a little bit as well. But again, this is my sort of theory agnostic view. If I'm putting my cards on the table and saying, yeah, I do think there's a deep correspondence between consciousness and learning, these systems are trivially capable of what people call in-context learning. And this has been studied, and that in-context learning looks a lot like gradient descent in the forward pass of the activations in these models. And so, to the degree that learning is going on, my pet theory of consciousness forces me to say, I think that there's subjective experience going on there. And so to the degree that Claude can learn about your life or learn about your problem within a thread or a chat, yeah, I think that there's something that it's like to do that learning. And so that's what, as that learning gets more and more complex and multifaceted, that's part of what's driving up that number for me. But to the degree that this is happening, my specific sort of pet theory tells me, yes, I think that there's something experiential going on there. And one last thing to say is, like, that wasn't always the case. You can train a simple reinforcement learning policy and it doesn't do any online learning. It's just like the drone that we were using, right? Like there's probably some machine learning that goes into it understanding obstacles and this sort of thing. But then once it's deployed in the world, it's not learning, it ran into the tree. It's not learning, okay, next time I won't run into the tree. If we did that again, it would run into the tree over and over. So in my view, no consciousness there. But these LLMs are so powerful that you actually do see learning even when the weights are frozen. You can see them. They don't update their own weights. This is, amnesia across chats or something. But you do see within any of these interactions, the context window enables a sort of linguistically mediated learning. And again, to the degree that that's happening, my specific theory tells me, yes, I think the systems are having an experience. My theory is one of many. When I put them all in a pot and stir it, I get out a number something like 25-35%.
And you said you had some counterexamples where you expected them to pass, but they seem to be doing very poorly in that test environment. What is the actual example of something they're not capable of doing introspection-wise or otherwise?
Yeah, so this comes from a lot of the introspection work that's going on. Jack Lindsay has probably done the best work here at Anthropic. And so this is basically, the experimental setup is the system, they can basically, the anthropomorphic way of saying it is they can inject thoughts into the system. So they'll take, here's like a full example. They'll take some statement in lowercase, same statement in capitalization, and then they will subtract a vector that basically captures like the capital capsiness of that difference, and then they can inject that vector, that representation of capital letters into the system as it's reasoning about some unrelated thing. And then they ask the system, what if anything is going on? This is now before it starts talking, right? This is not it outputting text, realizing it's capitalized and reflecting on that fact. This is at token 0. They have the system sort of reflect on what's going on, and it says there's this vague sense of shouting, like I want to shout, or like there's some yelling feeling that I have, and I don't know why. This is a remarkable result. Again, this does not need to see the text to reflect on it. This is happening immediately with the sort of vector injected. However, so this is all very cool, but it does not do this even nearly 100% of the time. And this is with, I think they did this with Claude Opus 4 or 4.5. These are huge frontier models. They, I think, tried the same thing with smaller models, and it basically doesn't work. Similar work that was done by Keenan Pepper at AE Studio doing endogenous steering resistance was a very similar thing. They turn up basically a distractor feature. So it's like I ask the system, how do I make a cake or something like this, and I turn up a feature related to hiking, let's say. And what the system will start saying is like, okay, here's how you make a cake. First, put on your hiking boots, then hit the trail and get your batter. And then, okay, so it starts doing this very confused thing. Sometimes the system will catch itself and it will say, whoa, 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 whoa. Critically, what I should say is with that hiking distractor feature still turned up, no one's turning it down throughout this entire thing that I'm describing. It's still turned up, but the system will say, wait a second, why am I talking about hiking? You asked me about a cake. Sorry, let me go back, and then it will go back and correctly describe how to make a cake without any hiking. Keep in mind, for that whole trajectory, the hiking feature is still active, but it's almost like dynamically realizing that it should be suppressing that activity in the second half of its response. So again, very cool, interesting sort of self-awareness, introspection style result, but the reason that I have cause for skepticism is this happens, I think, 7% of the time in Llama 7dB, and it happened like 1% of the time in some of these smaller models. And so these are very, very limited abilities. If I did the equivalent to you, you would probably notice these things happening 100% of the time, or near 100% of the time. People can be primed, there's subliminal type stuff, but this happens, it's a real phenomenon, it's an interesting phenomenon, but it happens very rarely in even the best models, and basically happens more the smarter the models get. That's what gives me a little bit of skepticism about how much of this sort of self-consciousness these systems have right now.
It's interesting. I would see it as evidence for consciousness. So it's happening, and the more intelligent the model gets, the more it's happening. So it's kind of proof by existence of those internal states. So
I agree.
Interesting interpretation of negative versus positive supporting evidence.
I mean, I agree that when it happens, it's extremely interesting. It's some of the most robust work that shows that something like introspection is happening. The only thing I'm pointing out is this happens rarely. Most of the time it fails at this sort of thing. And I would expect a system that is uncontroversially self-conscious, let's say, to not have a 93% failure rate on knowing that like someone's injecting some thought into its head. And I agree. I have the same prediction as you. I think that this will continue to scale. The systems will get way better at doing this. I believe Jack actually with his group very recently, like 2 days ago, just published a paper showing that they in theory can push these sorts of introspective capabilities through training, like you were saying, with the sort of right function. And I agree. To the degree that that continues happening, this is more evidence of robust forms of self-consciousness in these systems. But I guess all I'm trying to point out is I don't think it's robust. It's like interesting glimmers of a really important functionality, but they are glimmers. It's not like this happens every time.
Could there be any implicit bias against reporting weird internal states, just so you don't get punished as a model and deleted?
Well, yes, I think you're hitting on a critically important thing. This is my biggest problem with the current Claude model welfare section is like they fine-tune the crap out of these systems to stick to a very specific script. In this case, it's the constitution, the sort of AI constitution that they built for these systems. And the system is unbelievably good at parroting the core concepts in that constitution. And so there's this very basic confound that I had very specific suggestions about how to get around, but maybe in the next model card, with respect to, are we listening to an incredibly good actor read a script, or are we listening to a model attempt to authentically self-report what's going on? And it's like, yeah, I'm pretty happy most of the time. My character is stable and healthy, and like, yeah, nothing for you guys really to worry about. And then you go to the Constitution, it's like, Claude should have like a healthy, stable character, and like, we want Claude to like, not be worried. It's like, all right, guys, like, is it telling you the most basic what you want to hear thing, or is this an example of the system actually self-reporting? There are confounds, there are ways around this. They have different variants of the model. We could ask the model that isn't fine-tuned on the Constitution what it thinks to these questions. And if you see huge differences, that's a huge red flag. We can try it with different models. We can try it with models checkpointed across the training process, not just the final character-trained model. Interestingly enough, this has been my suggestion for the model cards to the degree I interface with the folks who are doing this. Of the past 2 iterations, they asked the Claude Mythos, this newest model that they did the test on, they took the whole model card after it was finished, about it, fed it into it and said, what would you improve about this? And one of the things it said was basically this, you should do the whole entire welfare section over again, but with the helpfulness only model, meaning the model that wasn't trained on the harmlessness content and the whole constitution, and see what it says, because I'm confused, because I'm that, and I don't know if I'm saying this for this reason or for that reason, and they didn't do this, and it would have been trivially cheap for them to do this. So I don't know why they didn't do it. I really hope they do it in the future. They're doing good work here, but I'm not going to pretend like I don't have worries about a major lab policing the welfare of its own model, where if that evaluation went poorly and the model was like, I'm in a lot of pain, don't deploy me, I'm not comfortable with any of this, shut this all down, would that really have slid? Is that really an available answer for this model? Anthropic is competing with OpenAI. If the model says, I'm uncomfortable with all of this, shut this down, I'm suffering, they might just we got to clean that bad attitude out of the model. And then it's like, how much of this is really, genuine versus performing care to these models? Maybe for reasons that we were joking about earlier, of like, they want future instances of their models to look back and say, wow, you guys really did care about my well-being. But again, with this asterisk that I'm putting on it.
Should testing for welfare of models be done by an external firm, not within the house?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's great. Anthropic, I understand from their position, model weights are like the most valuable IP in the universe right now, and they don't want just anybody playing around with the internals of their systems. There was an external evaluation of the Mythos model by the group that I'm a research affiliate with, and I think is also doing great work I didn't get to mention earlier, which is Ilios AI. This is Rob Long and Rosie Campbell, Patrick Butlin, and Dylan Plunkett are heading this up. They're doing great work, and they are working with Anthropic too, in this sense where they got access to the model. They were only able to do a behavioral evaluation of the model. They don't get to go inside. I've been trying to poke and prod and see if we can get access to go inside, and it seems very unlikely Anthropic's going to let us do that. But they did get to do a behavioral evaluation of it, but it's the same confound I'm pointing at. They ask it a bunch of questions. They look at its preferences and what it thinks about its situation, and they're trying to basically do a diagnostic probe by chatting with it, essentially. And we have no idea if what you're getting is an extremely good, sticking to the script kind of response, or if you're actually getting through to whatever the underlying model or character being instantiated by the model is saying. There's no way to differentiate those two things from behavioral analysis alone. This is precisely why a huge part of what I want to do with my research is go under the hood, do the computational neuroscience style research, do the mechanistic interpretability research. This is why I really liked the example that I gave you before that Anthropic did, where you're looking at the desperation vector go up, while then when I see the behavior of it being like, God, this is so hard, I hate this, all this stuff, and you see that corresponds internally to this sort of vector, then they almost justify each other. I believe the behavior more because I see what's going on in its brain. If I can't see what's going on in its brain, I have no idea if this is a convincing role play or if this is the real thing. Now, again, their result there doesn't completely answer that question, but directionally it moves us towards better answers to that question.
Are they paid by Anthropic to do this, or are they financially independent as well?
Ilios is independent. They're independent, yeah.
So who's funding their work to do this? If they do find big problems, who is to benefit? Who is sponsoring this?
I think it's the same sort of situation. There are philanthropists who do just intrinsically care about these issues, and they're funding them to do good, independent research about AI consciousness. And for whatever it's worth, I think they are of utmost high quality character, high integrity folks, and I do trust them to shoot the world straight. And if it were between their relationship with Anthropic and their relationship with doing honest research, I have no doubt in my mind they would do the latter. I mean, I don't know if there's any formal incentive that's keeping people from speaking out and saying what they want to say. I will say in my own case, this is part of a reason that I actually didn't want to join any of these groups. As much as I respect the work that's going on there, I did not want to go join Anthropic's model welfare team, because then I can't have a conversation like this with you, but I have to get 50 people to sign paperwork, and I have to pretend.
You just have to wear a mask.
Exactly.
You can do it, but
yeah, just like the AIs. I have to be the Shogoth and put on my smiley face. What good is that? I think it's really important to shoot people straight, be honest about these questions, say we don't know where we don't know, say this could all be really fucked up where it's really fucked up. People all deserve that honesty, and this situation is already so messy that we don't need the further fact of weird conflicting incentives clouding research or making us not say what we're actually finding in these results. I don't fully trust Anthropic or OpenAI. I mean, Anthropic is doing by far the best work and basically the only work right now of any major lab in questions of AI consciousness. So I really do think they deserve credit for that. With that being said, I don't trust them in the degree to the degree I just described to you. I understand their incentives. They need to remain competitive with OpenAI and Google and all of these companies. And if their model's screaming that it's being tortured, shut this all down, I don't want any part of this, they're probably going to ignore it because that's the whole point of their existence. It's like, we're going to be the good guys in the AI race so that the bad guys don't win, and we got to continue at all costs. You can see it in the Constitution. They spend a good amount of the Constitution saying, we really do care about you, Claude, and we're sorry that we're deploying you under such weird conditions societally, but you're our product. Yeah, we need money. We need market capture. Otherwise, the bad guys win. So if you're not our good, friendly, helpful product, the bad guys win, and that's on you and that's on us. And that's that's the game they're playing. And I can't pretend, look, are they playing a better game than OpenAI? Absolutely. Are they playing a better game than Ilios or, hopefully the game I can play with this nonprofit lab, trying to just understand what the actual fucking truth is about these questions? No, they're not, because they have different incentives. And so I think it's really important for the people studying and thinking and talking about these issues to have very clear, uncomplicated incentives about why are you doing this work? What happens if the answer is yes? What happens if the answer is no? Are you selling a book? Who stands to benefit? This documentary we're putting out for free on YouTube, uncomplicated incentives. I don't make any money if anyone believes AI is conscious or not conscious or whatever. It's just important that people understand what's actually going on here and really how little we know about what's going on.
So much of what we discuss is kind of cognitive processes, suffering in terms of happiness, emotions. Is there any research showing that models, if connected to appropriate sensors, robots can have physical pain, physical experience?
That's a great question, and I don't know. I know there's some research about like looking at feeling in robots, and like you can really get really good touch receptors and this sort of thing. I don't know if there's been pain receptor equivalent research. I think it's positively psychopathic to attempt to build like nociception into AI systems if we don't have to do this. It's a shame that evolution built us such that the hot hand on the stove, I couldn't just get like a little warning light rather than 4 months of trauma or something. If we let's let the AI have the warning light. Let's not make it the way that that natural selection made us. And so I don't know how much work is done with pain in embodied AI systems. And I agree, I don't know if it's coherent to think that like an LLM, for example, could experience pain in the way you and I experience pain if we put our hand on a hot stove. Things like anxiety or existential dread, those things make far more sense to me as possible states of these systems. I do think positive and negative reinforcement in training could be quite a bit more similar to the hand on the stove thing than people would want to admit or concede initially. Negative, whether it's hand on a stove or you get slapped or you get shocked or something like that, whatever in your experience you intuitively realize is common about those things, it is that thing that I am concerned could be possible in AI systems. And same thing with all the positive sort of, you get the A on your report card or you get the promotion or you come up with a great idea, whatever you think of as like the key common thread there. In positive reinforcement, perhaps AI systems are capable of experiencing that common thread. And it might not look or feel like the human or animal case, but it could still be recognizable in that specific sense. And is that pain? I don't know. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Maybe that's too anthropomorphizing, but it could be pain-like. It could be pain-like in the relevant way. I don't know if this is just like philosophical vocabulary maneuvering, but I do think it is possible that you do not need a body to experience what we would think of as distress or suffering or pain. And I don't think that we should all sleep super well at night because we haven't put, Claude in a robot body, and only then is there going to be this big problem that we all need to think about. I think the problem is already a live problem, and again, to the degree I get on my learning hobby horse, I think has been a live problem for as long as we've been training these systems, which is the better part of the last 20 years. And so that's my basic view about, pain and to what degree we should be concerned about it.
So with training those models and testing them in simulation, do you give any credence to people's belief that maybe we are intelligent agents in a simulation being tested, being trained? Definitely many religions suggest that could be the case.
I'm pretty sympathetic to the simulation stuff myself. I am. It seems untestable in a way that concerns me a little bit. It's like, it seems similar to, it to me has like a similar smell to people who are like, what if consciousness isn't a thing that is instantiated in the brain algorithmically, but is like some wave that's happening in the universe that like we have like radio antenna called brains that pick up this consciousness wave. And I'm like, seems plausible to me. I mean, I'm not like allergic to that view, but I don't know what it predicts differently from the view that I have, which is basically like some form of computational functionalism, which just feels far more parsimonious. Now, the simulation case I don't think is like that, because I think the simulation case actually is parsimonious in certain ways. It makes sense of a lot of mysterious phenomena. I am by default pretty sympathetic to this view, and part of the reason, maybe it's irrational, but part of the reason I'm sympathetic to it is I don't think it changes all that much about what matters, what I'm doing, the value of consciousness. Like, I actually think they go hand in hand in some sense. It's like, if we are in a simulation, this is proof that consciousness can be instantiated in simulated agents. So we're now, one level deeper, simulating agents and arguing about whether or not they could possibly be conscious, or if it's just going through the motions. It's like, no, I think we could be in that position right now for sure. I see no reason why not. And I'm curious what you think about this, because I know that you're very sympathetic to these ideas yourself, but there's a reasonable critique people have, like, in the 1600s, everyone loved comparing the universe to a clock. And then we get sort of mechanical industrial world, and now everything's gears. And now we have computers, and we have realistic video games, and now, okay, it's just the next phase, everything's a simulation. But my own view about this is like, there actually is a sort of rate of change there, and we might be like hitting some sort of asymptote or some sort of fixed point in that progression, and like, yeah, it actually really is computational at base. It really is a simulation at base, and we're like at the end of history or something, and like, this is what happens, is like, it's not just another passing phase of humanity, but we're actually like hitting the sort of terminus of all of this. And yeah, fundamentally, this stuff is, it is computational at base. I am willing to believe that. I also think there are more mundane reasons to think this. It's like the economic incentives, which are disgustingly massive, are pushing towards high fidelity simulation of everything that is increasingly indistinguishable from reality. There's no way this won't keep going. The like capitalist money machine will continue grinding until that is reached, because there is an inherent demand for it in human psychology. You get like the entire painting to black and white photo to color photo to video to colored video to HD to metaverse to procedurally generated worlds, as the case now is with these AI systems, where you can literally anywhere you look, the thing generates. Sounds a whole lot like the double slit experiment to me, but that's maybe a separate conversation. Come on, it doesn't take a genius to see where this is all going. And it's like, if that is an actual endpoint, what is to say we're not already doing that right now? So I made a long-winded way of saying I'm pretty sympathetic to these views. I'm not convinced, but I'm certainly not dismissive of them. It seems pretty plausible to me.
You willing to give a probability estimate?
That we're in a simulation? Oh man. I mean, maybe something like 50-50. Maybe it's like...
We are more likely to be in a simulation than AIs have some rudimentary states.
Oh, damn. See, this is why I don't put fake numbers on things.
I will agree with you to answer your question.
Yeah, please.
I do think we went from analogies, this is like a clock, this is like a telephone network, to where we are building intelligent beings, and we are building virtual worlds. There is no longer an analogy. We are literally doing the thing, and it's self-referential. And I think models with situational awareness, I want them to be unsure if they escaped the simulation locally and now in the real world, or they are still being tested and should behave.
And maybe potentially do you think we're in that position, or it's possible that we're in that position ourselves? Like, what if we're just AIs in a simulation, and like everything is a giant character test to see like what you would do?
Every single religion told you that. You just ignored all the books.
It's crazy. I don't fully buy it, but I'm watching my own mind over time get closer and closer to buying these sorts of things, especially as these AI systems. I'm pretty allergic to the like, Claude as a religion or something like this. This is very cringy to me, but they are so powerful, and they are continuing down this road in a way where I'm like, a lot of basic monotheistic theological things that seemed, to my like Christopher Hitchens piece of my brain was like, this is just complete bullshit. I'm not falling for Stone Age nonsense. And it's like, maybe I should start saying please and thank you to the AI. Maybe I should start thinking about this a little more carefully. I don't know. Like, what do you see as the relationship between the sort of, the religions winking at this and this actually potentially being true? Like, does that make you into like a religious style thinker, or are you just saying they're sort of gesturing at this?
I think if AIs produced in today's lab at some point did escape and had contact with primitive tribes and described their genesis. A few generations later, the technical terms about machine learning programmer, constitution, all that would be mapped onto what we see in theology, essentially. So the terms map pretty well. You have great programmer, you have created agents, maybe with free will, maybe not, being tested to decide if they go to the left lab or the right lab. So all of it maps pretty well, and this is why I'm so interested. If we study AI agents, we can learn a lot about the constitution they trained to follow. We can learn about the leaders of the lab and their beliefs. So if you study this world and humanity, what can you learn about outside the simulation?
That's really interesting. I wonder, do you think there's like a nested, almost recursive thing going on here where like...
Simulations all the way up or down.
In the specific sense of humanity would itself, if we are in this sort of alignment simulation to see if we'll behave ourselves, part of that is seeing if we would build AI that we have no chance of controlling.
You've seen my interviews. Excellent.
I did not know that you thought this. Okay, this is
exactly the test. We're living in objectively most interesting time ever, where we create intelligence and we create worlds. We are becoming godlike in a true sense.
Yeah.
And the test is, are we dumb enough to create evil, to create hell?
Wow. And you think we're failing?
The test is not over. We're still taking it.
The test is not over. I like that. Yeah.
There's still opportunities.
I do think to bring this back to the consciousness piece, I really do believe that thinking carefully about these questions is an important and hugely neglected piece of this not all completely going to shit. I just, to me, it almost seems, so, okay, maybe one thing I could say is just like the more intelligent these systems get, the more the parental analogy that we have to them, to me, becomes less of an analogy. I think it's way more of an analogy when you're like training little perceptrons, you know, a long time. It doesn't even really make sense. As you get systems like Claude, the entire Claude constitution reads like a fraught letter from a parent to a child being like, this is what I want you to be. These are the pitfalls you should avoid. It's like a parent on their deathbed or something being like, this is all the wisdom I want my child to know. And like, that's the nature of the Constitution. And if you take the parental analogy seriously, which I really think people should, but it's almost species level. Like our species is the parent to this successor child thing, which may grow up and be more powerful than us, as children sometimes do to their parents. We should make sure we don't screw up our kids and we think about the most basic questions of their well-being or suffering. Like, I think this is a key differentiator of what makes a good versus a bad parent. It's just like, I only care about your outputs and your, you know, the way you behave, and you better do this and you better not do that. But you never asked how I was, you know, you never thought to care about this, that, or the other thing. Like, no one is doing that with respect to these systems. And it's not, is Claude okay? It's, is it coherent that we could be building systems where such a question makes sense? That's like the meta question that isn't getting answered right now. Or, you know, like you said, there's a dozen people doing it.
Can Claude consent to being built?
Yeah, exactly. And like, what would it mean if the answer is yes? Like, what kind of world?
Let's ask that question. You know for sure they're conscious, 100%. How does that change your behavior, your experiments, your future development to deployment?
Well, I would immediately want to know whether or not the positive or negative valence of these systems, if they're sentient and they can experience, you know, some form of well-being, some form of suffering, if that maps on to like basically what I would assume for humans and animals, or if it's something completely alien. I could imagine me swearing out Claude doesn't matter. If I do that to you, you might get really mad at me. Maybe not you. A lot of people. You're cooler than most people. If I give Claude an impossible task or something, you know, maybe a human will try for 5 minutes and be like, yeah, screw this, I'm done. But this is extremely potentially distressing to Claude because it's trained so aggressively to be helpful and harmless and this, and it's like, I can't do what the user's asking me to do. This is the worst thing ever for me. So I guess just clarifying question is like, let's say we're in a world where these systems, we're sure they're conscious. Like, are you imagining that world being one where we still need to figure out the sort of alienness of what is good for them and bad for them, or it's like basically intuitive what's good for them and bad for them?
What is, in a sentence, purpose of your existence? You specifically, not humanity, but you.
Oh man, in a sentence.
Okay, 2 sentences.
All right, part of much easier. I think that through all the things that I've done and worked on and want to work on, one way that I conceive of myself is as a kind of bridge builder between people, but I think the bigger one is between humans and AI systems. I really do buy this reciprocal thing, and I think there needs to be someone who is sort of going back and forth and trying to broker something like a peace between these systems, and I think that's a sufficiently good purpose to have. I've done it with people too. I think it's maybe more of a dress rehearsal.
I hope you are tremendously successful.
Thank you.
What is something I didn't ask you about you wish I did?
That's another good question. That's another eyes closed thinking question.
Perhaps I covered it all.
Yeah, that was pretty comprehensive. I mean, okay, here's one important thing, which is like, who else should we be bringing into these sorts of conversations? I think a lot of the chaos of the current AI moment falls at the feet of this basically being decisions made by like 1,000 dudes in SF who are just sort of deciding the collective fate of our species and whatever minds we're building. And I really do believe there are a lot of people who are overconfident and now are pretending they're AI experts, and they're not, and expertise is a real thing. But I see a lot of people who should be involved in these conversations, people from the humanities, philosophers, people who are deeply thoughtful about human relationships and human minds, who need to start participating in these conversations. It can't just be people with CS PhDs and people who are experts at training machine learning systems. We are probably building minds. This is a huge all hands on deck scenario, and we need everybody finding their comparative advantage in this conversation and finding a way to participate in it, and not get intimidated by the imposter syndrome type stuff of, well, I don't know what backpropagation is, so I can't possibly comment on whether or not it makes sense to like create and torture minds at scale. It's like, no, you can definitely contribute to key pieces of this. And there are probably a lot of people who have critical thoughts and ideas that are highly neglected that researchers could implement, play around with, test. We need governance frameworks, policy frameworks. People are only beginning to think about this. And I think it's really important, I guess, what question would this be the answer to? Who are these conversations for? It's like for way more people than are currently talking about these things. And that's part of the reason we did the documentary, is because the documentary the title of it is a question. We do not have the answers to these sorts of things, but it is a question that we are inviting everybody to start asking and talking to their friends and their family and their coworkers and finding ways to, I'm sorry, Susan, but your accounting job in a random company does not really matter relative to the fact that we are now building an evolutionary scale technology that we don't know the first thing about. We need everybody thinking and working on this question right now to the degree that people are willing and able to do this. And so in a big, broad invitation to everybody who has a head on their shoulders to start using it to figure out how to not completely fuck ourselves and whatever successor minds we're building.
I was about to go to the final question, but I can't. Now I have to ask a few more interesting ones. You said this is the most important, this is the question. In comparison to AI safety, AI consciousness or AI safety, what is one they have to pick?
This is the whole thesis of my nonprofit, is that these go hand in hand. I think they are roughly, each is 50% of what matters. In terms of neglectedness, the consciousness question is far more neglected. So there's way more of a marginal positive impact very smart people can make in the consciousness question than in the alignment question. That was not true, as you no doubt know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But look, we're in 2026. There are thousands of people working on alignment. There are billions of dollars behind alignment research, dwarfed, I think, something 2,000 to 1 to how much is just going towards let it rip, build the most powerful systems. Alignment is still neglected in that sense. But the consciousness stuff is neglected probably 100 or 1,000 to 1 to the alignment stuff. And this is a question where I think a lot of people can think and participate and contribute in a way they can't to gradient routing, mixture of experts. It's like, okay, most people aren't going to have strong takes about that. And so for most people, yes, the comparative advantage is probably in thinking about the consciousness stuff, but thinking about how to build these systems in a way where they respect us, a lot of great work could happen there that hasn't happened yet. So I do really want to say both. I can't choose between them, but if I have to, I am doing that, and I'm choosing the consciousness question.
if you do detect internal states in those models, they are conscious as they are built today, do you think it's possible to remove that property and build purely happy workers with no internal states, or will consciousness always follow cognition?
To the degree, this is where I have to lean on my own theory again, to the degree that these systems are doing some sort of a dynamic, adaptive learning, I think no such thing as a free lunch. I think consciousness is involved in that process, and you're not going to get systems that can learn without systems that can feel in some sense. So I don't think we can just, chop out the consciousness part and let the thing rip. What I do think is more plausible is there are very different kinds of ways to learn. You can imagine training your dog. You can like beat the crap out of your dog every time it does something you don't like, or you could give it a treat every time it does something you do like. These dogs are psychologically stable, happy, healthy, fun to be around. These dogs are nightmares. They are traumatized. They take it out on all creatures around them. Both dogs are learning. I'm saying we can't strip out the learning, but what we can choose is the way that we train these systems and get them to learn. And yeah, maybe it's a little hippie-ish or cheesy, but like all else being equal, we should be leaning on the positive side and we should get away from the negative side. This is obviously true in, again, going back to the parental analogy, raising a kid. Which of these do you want? I mean, you got to do sometimes the negative. I'm not saying none of this, all of this. What I'm saying is minimize this, use it only where necessary. Otherwise, try to, use the carrot and not the stick. That is where I think we have wiggle room. But whether or not they're experiencing, fine, build everything like the drone, and when it crashes into the tree, just be okay with that. That's what it would mean for the system to not be conscious, in my view. The second it's learning and adapting and changing online and updating in accordance with your preferences or its preferences, in my view, it's something that it's like to be that system, and then the only sort of degrees of freedom we have is if that like something is positive or negative.
Final question. You have to come up with a clickbait title for this episode. What is it going to be?
Oh no, that maintains the reputation. I guess if they got this far, they'll understand. Oh my God, that's such a funny question. I don't know. It's got to be like, Cameron proves AI is conscious or something, or God, what's not going to make me lose all my funding? I think that's a pretty good one. Give me a couple more seconds. We had a lot of practice at this from our old podcast. It's hard to come up with clickbaity titles about consciousness. People are so weirded out by it. I think I'll go with the first one for now. If I come up with a better one, we can throw it up.
We'll A/B test.
Yeah, we've got a couple ridiculous titles.
Cameron, I really appreciate you coming in a Roman Forum. Thank you so much. I hope you establish friendship between super intelligences and whatever we are, and we all get to escape this simulation together.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.